On the 6th of February 2022, Queen Elizabeth II, our longest reigning monarch, celebrates her Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years since she ascended the throne.
She is the icon of icons, the only stable influence in my whole life.
Through good times and bad, the Queen has been a constant and reassuring presence in all our lives.
Television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day.
On this historic occasion, some of our best-loved stars share their memories of the biggest changes they've lived through during the Queen's reign.
Are we going?
We are going.
Oh, good.
From growing up...
Everyone on our street was getting televisions for the coronation, and you couldn't be left out, so it was like, Mom, Dad, we got to get a telly.
To striving for equality...
Women, come and join us!
We had to fight for women's rights. I wanted to be more than just a housewife.
Earning a living...
Grandfathers.
No one is more aware of these changes than the Queen.
Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. The way we embrace it defines our future.
This is London. The King passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning.
On the 6th of February 1952, the death of Elizabeth's father, King George VI, shocked the nation. At the time, Princess Elizabeth was on holiday in Kenya before a planned Commonwealth tour. On receiving the news that she was now Queen, she immediately returned home and was met by the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
Seeing her at that very young age, I think that affected all of us. She came back all in black, and I couldn't help, as a little girl of 10, identify with the whole loss of your father thing and what she gave up, what she sacrificed. She took it on, and she has been admirable.
When Queen Elizabeth came to the throne, Britain was a very different place. Our cities were bomb-damaged and the country was deep in debt.
As kids, there was the remnants of the war, and we would just play anywhere you could kick a ball. So either in the street or in a little vacant area. And we would call these areas the bommies. So let's go down the bommy. It was only later you realise it meant bomb site.
The 40s went on into the middle of the 50s. In some respects, where rationing was concerned, it was much more stringent, really.
If you were lucky and you got a rabbit, you know, that would last probably all week. Eggs were at a shortage, but I do remember having the odd egg when I was little.
When I went to school, the thing I looked forward to when I was little was the little tiny bottle of milk that they'd give you mid-morning. I was always hungry. I was always hungry as a child.
In 1950s Britain, living conditions were basic, and for many, bathrooms were a luxury.
There were communal lavatories in a little yard at the top of the street. I think it was being seen to be going to the lav which offended my mother's sense of social proprieties, really.
Not only did we have an outside toilet, we didn't have proper baths, so the old tin bath would come out.
I would literally have a bath in the front of the fire in a zinc bath once a week. And the rest of the time, I would get my legs up over the sink and be washing the sink.
We were very poor. People lived on top of each other.
When I was just a little girl.
Every house, the door was open. Every kid went in everybody else's home. His mum would say, have a slice of bread and jam or whatever, or they'd come to my house.
We loved it. We had an out, but we were happy. And it was true, really. You know, you didn't have much, but it was a great community spirit.
On the 2nd of June 1953, communities from all over Britain came together to watch their young Queen being crowned Elizabeth II.
And so the Queen has started on her way to Westminster.
The coronation was a kind of time of celebration. A vibrant, beautiful Queen, wonderful, handsome husband, tremendous atmosphere. And we in Britain, after the war now, we wanted to rejoice in this new Elizabethan age.
It was something I will never, ever forget. This beautiful, beautiful young Queen. And it was like them just a fairy tale.
Suddenly there was this idea of a resurgence, and leading it all was this young woman.
She really did convey the impression that she had inherited a duty which was an important, not to say sacred duty, and that she intended to discharge that duty with every fibre of her body.
The things which I have herewithal promised, I will perform and keep, so help me God.
This age-old ceremony was broadcast live on television.
It was a memorable moment in which the whole nation shared because, of course, there was only one network, and that was the BBC.
A lot of people bought their first televisions to watch the coronation because it was so important.
We were the only house in the street that had a telly, and we had virtually the whole road in our front room. Kids on the floor, grannies and older people on the settee, my mum making tea.
And out on the balcony of the palace stands the Queen crowned.
The televising of the coronation brought the young Queen closer to her people than any previous monarch.
The entire nation was pulled together in a way that they never had been since the end of the war by such an extraordinary royal event suddenly becoming public property.
The coronation was a splash of colour in a monochrome world. But the day after the celebrations, we all returned to work.
Manchester was a very thriving industrial city. Lots of smoking chimneys. It looked like Ellis Lowry. The factories were all in full activity, and there were cotton mills, of course, still working. It was dirty, proud, impressive.
In the first decade of the Queen's reign, we were the most heavily industrialised country in the world. Our main source of power was coal, an industry which employed nearly 700,000 men.
My dad provided 18 tons a day on an 8-hour shift. He took out 18 tons. Shoo, 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 and they're moving coal and big pieces of coal for 8 hours. Nearly 2,000 feet down, in the dark and the loneliness.
Grandfathers went down the mine and fathers went down the mine, and that industry encompassed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people.
Your parents would say, you've got to have a trade. So I went into ship repair as a welder. But it was a real physical sort of work, labour intensive. I used to go home filthy dirty, honestly.
Accompanied by the Duke, the Queen came to perform the launching of the vessel, whose name until that hour had been kept a close secret.
In 1953, the Queen visited the John Brown shipyard on Clydebank to christen the new royal yacht.
I name this ship Britannia. I wish success to her and to all who sail in her.
With a packed programme of public engagements, the young Queen was a rare example of a working mother. Most women were encouraged to stay at home as housewives, and that's when the real work began.
My mother was a housewife, my grandmother was a housewife, and my aunts were housewives. A housewife had to run a household. You had to keep the house clean, spotless, from top to bottom. It was a matter of social distinction. She's not done her step for several days. It was a job. There weren't washing machines and dishwashers and spin dryers at all.
There were industrial wash houses. You get in there and there are these huge industrial machines where you pile all your washing in, and have to pull it out, and have to hang everything in the dryer, put it in and wait till it dries, then fold it.
And it was a routine that Monday was wash day.
Ironing on Tuesday, shopping every day, because of course there was no fridges, so the food would rot.
But by the mid-1950s, housewives were getting a helping hand.
Mrs. Harrison, what have you bought?
Well, there's the mixer, the fridge, the washing machine, the dishwasher, and the polisher.
When white goods came in and you could just put things in a washing machine, it liberated women.
I think I remember them getting a refrigerator, because up until then I can remember Dad had dug a hole in the garden and keeping milk out there. I suppose it kept cold.
Although the war had ended 10 years earlier, Britain was still a militarised society. The Queen presided over almost 700,000 regular service personnel and 2 million conscripts. National service was compulsory for young men.
I dreaded it. I absolutely dreaded it.
And the next one.
And it looked like a terrible ditch at the end of one's schooling. The worst thing was the army, and of course I ended up in the army and in the infantry as well.
Many believed that national service instilled discipline in young men. And discipline started early.
You would never answer a policeman back. God, he'd smack you right round the head quicker than you could say Jack Robinson.
Serious crimes were rare, but public morality was rigidly policed. Murder still carried the death penalty, homosexuality was illegal, and divorce was strictly taboo. But while most adults were conforming, the younger generation were creating their own image and lifestyle.
We weren't allowed to go into pubs and bars until we were 21, and so there had to be somewhere else for us to go. And the Two Eyes coffee bar. I had a coffee bar on the top, and then you went down a step to what looked like a railway carriage, a tunnel, and at one end was a small stage, and that's where I stood with my 2 friends and a drummer, and we just played.
So all is ready now for the Royal Variety performance.
Why do you want to dance and hold my hand?
I liked rock and roll because it was an exciting art form. It was a very exciting period.
I remember the impact of Rock Around the Clock. I remember saying to people, something's happened. Something's happened to music.
We were the teenagers. That was when the word came in. There hadn't been a word for us till then.
A lot of the money teenagers earn goes into buying records. A 3-minute single costs over 7 shillings. If it's a hit, a record can sell 1 million copies.
My first record was The Locomotion by Little Eva, and I had a little tiny record player, and it was a little 45, wasn't it? And you had to put the arm across. I loved it.
If you're going to be a teenager, you've got to be a teenager in the 60s. The revolution happened in the 60s.
It was the decade that gave youth a voice. Before that, youth didn't really have a voice, and before that there was the war. The world was your oyster, really. You really felt you could do anything.
I'm gonna stand on my own 2 feet.
It was in the 60s that the Queen's 2 eldest children became teenagers and started public school. Princess Anne went to Benenden in Kent. And Prince Charles departed for Gordonston in Scotland.
This is the really modern way to go to school, by aeroplane, piloted by father.
Gordonston, which Prince Philip had also attended, was famous for its strict discipline and tough physical education. But life for other young men was about to change. The phasing out of conscription would open the doors to a teenage revolution.
We were in a generation that grew up fully expecting to go in the national service. And then the second we qualified, it was as if God came down and sort of parted the waters and said, you don't have to go in. It was like, oh, thanks. And I say, without that, there wouldn't have been the Beatles.
Love, love me do. You know I love you.
The first time I heard of the Beatles was a record that had come out called Love Me Do. I just loved that sound. They just caught me, as they caught everybody.
So please, love me do.
When the Beatles came out, I, like every other teenage girl in the world, thought they were the cutest things ever.
The Mersey sound. Yes, Liverpool's selling pop music. Liverpool kids are proud of the fact that their city is providing the world with beat music and an offbeat cult of fashion.
There were great days to be around Liverpool. It was just being in the right time at the right place, and that whole scene, that almost the birth of that Mersey sound.
It was such an awakening. You were part of a cultural revolution. You wouldn't have called it that. It was just having fun.
While the Beatles were conquering the world, the Queen was visiting the four corners of the Commonwealth.
Emphatically, it was a royal welcome enjoyed by the Queen and Duke in Kingston.
From an early age, the Queen had been passionately committed to the people of the Empire and Commonwealth.
When I was growing up in Trinidad, every day when we went to school, we sang, God Save the Queen, because we were brought up to believe that the Empire was part of our world.
But the idea of empire was changing, as the Queen had reflected in her 1953 Christmas broadcast, made during her first overseas tour as monarch.
The Commonwealth bears no resemblance to the empires of the past. It is an entirely new conception, built on the highest qualities of the spirit of man, friendship, loyalty, and the desire for freedom and peace.
I had a whole series of scrapbooks of Lilibet in every available coronet crown, and my mother thought we should get a glimpse of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and he was on my side. I saw him quite clearly, and I could see the Queen's little arm going backwards and forwards.
The Queen is very proud of being head of the Commonwealth. She wanted to make sure that everyone in the Commonwealth felt as if they belonged. She wanted to open the doors for them.
During the first decades of her reign, hundreds of thousands of Commonwealth citizens arrived to help rebuild post-war Britain.
My mother came over from Jamaica in 1958. There were lots of adverts asking people to come from the Commonwealth and help out with the health service.
When I came over here, you didn't expect to get off the boat and walk the street and find gold here, there, and everywhere. But the image that I had is somewhere where there are possibilities.
But many people experienced a hostile reception.
When my mum first arrived in this country, she was followed down the street by young kids who asked her where her tail was, because they'd never seen a black person before. So they assumed she had a tail. And they shouted horrible things at her in the street.
In 1967, the National Front was founded.
It was horrid, the whole atmosphere of this immigration thing, the blacks keep Britain white. It was quite full on and frightening. And you could see it seeping in everywhere.
We had rivers of blood. We had the National Front. We had abuse. Life changed a little bit from that moment on. Suddenly you realised you weren't what you thought you were. You weren't British anymore. You were actually somebody. You were an immigrant.
But the Queen offered a different approach.
Queen Elizabeth let everybody know that It's okay. Look, I'm talking to these people. They're like us. We're all human beings. And I think that's why it is that she's held in the hearts of so many people. I think is because she allows people to look at other people and go, yeah, you are. You're just the same.
By the mid-60s, Britain was booming, leading the way in music, fashion and technology.
The post office tower seems to soar, almost 600 feet of it, looking as if it were keeping watch over Greater London. As the Queen came to give a royal signature to the visitors' book, they told her Windsor Castle was visible from the top.
But it wasn't only the capital that was being rebuilt. Across the country, inner city slums were being demolished and the people moved to new towns and suburbs.
There were literally tens of thousands of houses created in Liverpool. They were better than anything we'd known. They had a little front garden, a little back garden. So our parents were really happy to be relocated into these areas. There was a great community spirit.
Suddenly, we moved. Blackfriend Road, Sidcup, Kent. Semi-detached, all lovely, smelt new. Honestly, it was like you'd lived in a tent all your life and suddenly you've gone into Buckingham Palace.
It was thrilling for my mum and dad to have a flat that was just theirs, with their own bedroom and a separate bedroom for their daughter. I mean, it was magnificent.
But while our homes were improving, women were no longer willing to be tied to them.
I wanted to be more than just a housewife. People who wanted a career, I think at that point we had to fight for it. It was the beginning of that women's lib aspect and women's rights.
And one remarkable invention would change women's lives forever.
Millions of words have been written for and against it. For this little white tablet is more explosive than dynamite.
When the contraceptive pill came in, we thought that was the answer to everything, didn't we? Because we could have our children, but then we had to say over how many we were going to have or when we were going to have them.
God bless the man who invented the pill, because he gave us freedom, and we're out now and we're not going back in the box.
Suddenly there was a kind of a liberation. Everything was burgeoning. And it was a time, I think, when women recognised, I can do this.
And they had support from one prominent working mother.
In the modern world, the opportunities for women to give something of value to the human family are greater than ever, because through their own efforts, they are now beginning to play their full part in public life. Come and join us!
By 1970, women were demanding greater equality.
It was a very positive time. I was very keen to be independent, to make my own choices, to make my own career, to be equal.
The introduction of a Sex Discrimination Act and Equal Pay Act showed there were new possibilities for women.
When I got married in the 70s, it didn't cross my mind that I'd stop working. I think there were so many chances for so many women, and girls thought, oh, actually, I could have a career.
In 1971, a new portrait of the Queen was being stamped onto billions of coins. The old pounds, shillings and pennies were consigned to history, as our money went decimal.
My mum was furious. When she went shopping, she refused to deal in decimalised coins. She'd hold out the money and say, I don't want to know how much it is in that awful money, just take what you need.
These are the 10-penny coins. This is the 2-penny coin.
How are you getting on with the new coins?
Well, it's just terrible. I was working in the West Country. Older people said, oh, not sure about this here decimalisation. But the kids all said, yeah, great, because, of course, they were doing decimalisation in schools. And so the kids took to it, of course, like that.
I remember we used to profiteer off of the older people. They couldn't quite get the grasp of how much this was worth compared to that. So we used to change coins with adults. We go around scouring anywhere to find old pennies. People caught on pretty quick, you know, once they started realising what crooks we were.
Cumbernauld is one of Scotland's successful new towns. The Queen learned that a sense of community has been preserved here
During the 60s and 70s, the Queen opened new towns and public housing developments across the country.
Do you like this house?
I love this house, yes. Shat have had nice neighbours, and I says everybody's really lovely down here. It's a nice place.
While most people still rented, many of us aspire to own our own homes.
When you do tell people you've got your own house, it's a status symbol, you know, you just feel nice, you know.
When we got married, we bought a tiny little end of terrace cottage. A, because we could afford it, B, also it had a garden. An Englishman's home is his castle, however tiny it was. And this little end of terrace house was tiny. We had some friends came round and she walked in the front door and said, "Oh, goodness, I didn't know they made houses this small."
You can get it if you really want. Our first house was a really beautiful American-style bungalow. It had a rustic brick wall, which my mother could never understand. She thought when it was finished and cemented over, it would be great. But we thought it was just magical. And for a price, 2,800 quid, can hardly believe it.
How about giving your home a new look? There's no time like the present for a coat of paint or a change of interior decor.
As home ownership increased, so did our enthusiasm for DIY.
It was independence for the first time. That freedom of having your own house to paint the walls whatever colour you wanted. The dining room was dark brown, and the front room was a shocking shade of green. It was wonderful.
I got myself a DIY book. I ripped up the carpets and I got this old sander. And I spent hours sanding up and down, and when it finished, polishing it. Loved it. And it looked fantastic.
On the dance floor, teenagers were also finding new ways to express themselves.
I think it was an amazing time to be a teenager because youth culture gave you an alternative to kind of normal life. You know, things like David Bowie, Mark Bolan, Alice Cooper, all of those things were sort of slightly otherworldly, and they weren't things that your parents would like. It was quite eclectic, I think, the 70s. You had punk rock, you had electro, and then you had hip-hop. I mean, it was... And then you had disco as well going on at the same time.
They had these massively wide trousers that could house a family of four. And you had the pockets down here on the side, the high waistband. You wore a tank top that was usually stripy. And you wore a shirt with a collar so large you could land Concorde on it. And that's how we rolled.
My mum did buy me a pair of platform shoes. I did wear them to school and get sent home immediately. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, silver jubilee.
In 1977, the Queen celebrated 25 years on the throne. And across the UK, communities turned out to celebrate at thousands of street parties.
The great thing about the Jubilee is that it gave a whole new generation an opportunity to show how much they appreciated the monarchy in general, the Queen in particular. But apart from the coronation itself, when had there been an opportunity for the country to come together and say, actually, we quite like having a monarchy, and we think you're doing a good job?
When I wake up in the morning,
the nation showed her how much they loved her by coming out for those great street parties, the flags flying, and it was almost spontaneous. Everybody wanted to say, long live the Queen, because she had given so much to her nation.
We just all had a whale of a time. This wonderful feeling that we were celebrating our lives through the lives of the Queen and Prince Philip, and that she'd managed 25 years. Looking back now, what a short way into that reign we were.
The Silver Jubilee was a moment of joy in a decade of economic turmoil.
Industry needs power. At home, you could get by with less, so switch off some power. Now.
It was in 1973 that a pay dispute between coal miners and the government, combined with petrol shortages, plunged the country into an energy crisis. Prime Minister Edward Heath announced drastic action.
We are limiting the use of electricity by almost all factories, shops and offices
to 3 days a week. In terms of comfort, we shall have a harder Christmas than we have known since the war.
We are sorry, owing to labour difficulties, very few trains will leave from Waterloo tonight.
The atmosphere was quite scary, in a sense, because you just didn't know what was going to happen. It was very volatile. But we were doing what we do best in this country, is just toughing it out.
As coal and oil stocks dwindled, blackouts became commonplace.
I remember the electricity going off, but when you're a kid, that's exciting. When all the lights go out and you have to eat by candlelight, that's kind of like thrilling when you're a kid.
We didn't have TV. We used to sit there, played Monopoly and Cluedo. It was great for all that.
When the telly was on, when you did have electric, it was just the news, and it was what's the Prime Minister doing about that, and what we're going to do now, what we're going to do on more strikes, more power cuts, more 3-day week. It was really tough to live through.
After a snap election, the new Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, granted the miners a 30% pay rise. The crisis was over, for now.
There's someone new on the morning shift at Silverwood Colliery.
A year later, the Queen paid a visit to a coal mine in Yorkshire.
With the Royal Standard flying from the pit head, Queen comes suitably dressed for the occasion. Before going on to inspect the coalface, the Queen unveils a plaque commemorating the visit.
But despite the truce, industrial unrest continued into the 1980s, when conflict flared between the miners' union and the Queen's first female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher.
We're going to win! Keep on!
In Thatcher, you had somebody who was determined that she would not be beaten, as some of her predecessors had been hammered into the ground by industrial unrest and by the miners.
Trade unions were very active and powerful. When Thatcher came in, she was determined to crack that. If she could crack the miners' union, she could crack unions.
We were watching these horrible news reports from the front line of the miners' strike, where people were being beaten up and baton charges and mounted police and things like that.
The television pictures of yesterday's battle have left their mark on all of us, including its reported one special and dismayed viewer, Her Majesty the Queen.
Margaret Thatcher refused to give in to the miners, and after a year-long dispute, union leader Arthur Scargill called off the strike.
The strike itself will be over on Tuesday and there'll be a disciplined vote. No!
I remember the terrible consequences that had on whole communities back home. People were betrayed on both sides, and families don't talk to each other in Wales still, and I suspect it's the same in other communities. That to me is one of the saddest things to have come out of it.
With her victory over the unions, Mrs. Thatcher was free to pursue another flagship policy, privatisation.
The Telecommunications Act made it possible for the people of the United Kingdom to share in the ownership of British Telecom.
Applications to buy shares in formerly nationalised companies poured in from millions of ordinary people.
There was a real excitement about joining in. It was like, the National Lottery was on permanently, and you could get a bit of it, It could be you.
These British gas shares, it couldn't be easier to do. If you see Sid, tell him, won't you?
Privatisation was actually pretty revolutionary.
Are you Sid?
Yes.
Oh, boy, have I got a message for you.
Sid?
I lent every single member of our Virgin staff money so that they could go and buy shares. They all made a very good return out of British Gas, British Telecom, all these companies, even British Airways.
Yuppies had come about, and you see 18-year-olds with red braces and with Porsches, and give me the money,
This is people making money and going on about it. It's one of the things you didn't really do in Britain. It was American, it was brash. We're going to make lots of money, and we're going to shout about it.
What a splendid picture. From the Royal Gallery into the Parliament Chamber.
In 1992, the Queen marked 40 years on the throne. And at the state opening of Parliament, another woman was taking on an historic role.
After 600 years, it's Madam Speaker. Betty Boothroyd beats the competition for the Commons chair.
I'd never expected the majority that I got, because I didn't want just a handful of votes in a majority. I wanted a comfortable one that gave me confidence. I think that some of the members, when I was elected, thought they could roll me over like a pussycat and do their bidding, but no way, I was quite tough with them.
Order! The honourable gentleman will resume his seat immediately! Immediately!
The 90s, for me, felt that it was just women being promoted to the things that they should be doing. So, you know, Betty Boothroyd being Speaker, it was like, well, why shouldn't she be Speaker?
As Eric Morecambe would say, there's no answer to that.
But the House of Commons wasn't the only boys' club getting a shake-up. Stella Rimington was made the head of MI5. And the Anglican Church voted to ordain its first female priests.
I just remember being through the 90s thinking I could do anything I want. And actually, being a woman isn't a barrier. We had to work hard and we had to, be focused, but we could achieve anything.
And as if to prove the point, in 1996, 5 young British women became a global phenomenon.
The Spice Girls, everybody knew they were going to be huge, and they were so not media trained, it was brilliant. It was like herding cats.
I want to ask you a question. Can we come to dinner, please?
There'd be pictures of the Spice Girls joshing with Prince Charles, who I think secretly loved it, because they were just being themselves.
I think the Spice Girls were speaking for a generation of how we were feeling in that era anyway. Well, you're enough, you're good enough, we need encouragement from each other. And rather than a put down, a pull up, saying, you know what, come on girl, you can do it. The Queen is the ultimate, ambassador of girl power. A huge example for all of us.
Throughout the decade, our once industrial economy was giving way to the service sector, computers and telecommunications.
Almost 1 in 10 of us has one of these, and by the end of the century it'll be 1 in 4.
It was a far cry from 1956, when the Queen made the first official long-distance call without an operator.
The Lord Provost of Edinburgh speaking.
This is the Queen speaking from Bristol. Good afternoon, Lord Provost.
Good afternoon, Your Majesty.
In a few moments, Bristol subscribers will be able to make trunk calls by merely dialing the right number up to a distance of some 300 miles.
And 4 decades later...
I don't remember getting my first mobile. It's kind of like... feels like I've always just had it. Gosh, time before mobile phones.
You'd agree to meet somebody, probably a week in advance, and then you just have to stand there and wait for them to arrive. And you stand there for an hour.
I was one of the last to have a mobile phone. I don't want people phoning me up. You're forced into having it all. Now I can text my wife to say I'm on my way home, put the kippers on.
By the mid-1990s, the World Wide Web would revolutionise the way we communicate and share information.
The Queen joined the pupils at Kingsbury High School to test out the new Buckingham Palace website.
I'm sure that some of you have parents who have found the internet and the World Wide Web to be a bit of a mystery. But the internet is rapidly becoming a part of everyday life.
When the decade starts, people are telephoning, writing, faxing. By the end of the decade, they're emailing, they're zapping, texting, doing all sorts of things which no one would have thought of.
The first time I sent an email, my son nearly fainted. It took me a while. It's been a tricky learning process, but to be able to Google, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. I love it.
I remember getting an email address. None of my friends had it, so I didn't have anybody to email. But suddenly being able to take control of booking the competitions I went to, that suddenly you could look online and you go, right, do you know what, tomorrow morning I'm going to go and race in Zurich. That was amazing.
When I'd met my husband, he said, you have an email address, right? And I went, yes! I didn't even know what that was at the time. And I remember coming back to my friend who was big in computers here and just going, Wayne, I need an email address. What is it? Where do I buy one?
In 2002, the nation came together to mark the Queen's Golden Jubilee. In a speech to Parliament, she reflected on some of the changes she had lived through.
Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. We also take pride in our tradition of fairness and tolerance. The consolidation of our richly multicultural and multi-faith society is being achieved remarkably peacefully and with much goodwill.
We are, whether some people like it or not, a thoroughly multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. The Queen is terribly aware of that and would be horrified were her jubilees and so on not showpieces which accurately represent that.
The noughties, there was a shift in perception when it came to what is British culture and what is, how do we identify that? And actually, it's made up of lots of different types of people from different backgrounds, and that is the new face of Britain.
During her Golden Jubilee year, the Queen ensured her busy itinerary reflected a true picture of modern Britain.
The call to prayers in Scunthorpe's Mosque, one of more than 600 spread across the UK. It was this community, though, that chose to invite the Queen to visit, spurred on partly by the anti-Muslim backlash after September the 11th, when their mosque was daubed with graffiti.
I think it was very important for the Queen to go to the mosque when times were difficult in Britain with us Muslims. It just gave a lot of people confidence that, you know, the mosque isn't a place that's going to scare people. It's a place where we go to pray and, you know, be close to God.
The sixth decade of the Queen's reign witnessed two historic social changes. 8 years after Princess Diana's tragic death, Prince Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles. Both were divorcees. 70 years earlier, his great-uncle Edward VIII had been forced to abdicate in order to marry a divorcee, Wallis Simpson.
By the time the Queen had been on the throne for several decades, the whole country was living with different models of family, and there wasn't a corner of the land that was unaffected by those changes.
A few months later, another high-profile couple cemented their relationship in Windsor.
Sir Elton John has joined hundreds of same-sex couples across England and Wales, taking part in the first civil partnership ceremonies.
I think that from the Queen's reign in the 50s, where being gay was illegal, to civil partnership, it was momentous. You were accepted, and that was a huge deal.
If you had told me that by the middle of the 2000s, gay relationships could be recognised on a more or less equal footing with straight marriage, I would never have believed it.
The whole civil partnership thing was something that actually put a smile on most people's faces, for people to start actually opening their minds a little bit and saying, actually, maybe the world should be this place where we're going more towards happiness and less towards anger and hatred.
In 2010, there was another royal first when Prince William became engaged to his long-term girlfriend, Kate Middleton. Unlike previous royal consorts, Kate was not an aristocrat. She was solidly middle class. And her ancestors had even humbler backgrounds.
This is Hettonle Hole in County Durham, and for generations, Kate Middleton's ancestors lived here and worked down in the mines.
She was a commoner, which I think was hugely significant because this was the first time that it was happening. But she was so beautiful and so gracious. She was just princess material.
What a moment, Michael Middleton and his daughter Catherine.
I remember seeing her dress and the bridesmaids, and you just wanted to just be part of it. It really brought the whole nation together, and it was a great excuse to have a party.
Oh, watch the whole day. Watch the whole day. I wasn't going to watch it. Wasn't interested. And then just like glued.
I thought one day William will be king and Kate will be queen. How fortunate to have such a modern couple with tradition.
Lots of shouts from the crowd here. And that's the reward.
As the couple left for their honeymoon, the Queen returned to work. In May 2011, she became the first British monarch to visit the Republic of Ireland. For many Irish people, the Queen symbolised a colonial power they had fought against for centuries. And though most of Ireland had achieved independence in 1921, the Queen's reign had been marked by the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which had claimed over 3,500 lives.
To see it happen and the sense of a completely different relationship, a laying down of the past, and the sense of joy in the country was clear. She was welcomed wholeheartedly, I think.
I think it's fantastic. I do, really. And I think it's 2011, not 1916, and it's time to move on, really.
Uachtaráin agus a coisa.
Under her breath, the President of Ireland had said, wow. The Queen had begun with a greeting in Gaelic.
With the benefit of historical hindsight, we can all see things which we would wish had been done differently, or not at all.
And 13 months later, in Belfast, the Queen and former IRA commander Martin McGuinness would appear together in a remarkable moment of public and personal reconciliation.
For Her Majesty the Queen, her own cousin had been murdered by the IRA. For Martin McGuinness, she was the head of the armed forces who he blamed for killing many of his own. And it was that emotional backdrop that made that event completely unforgettable.
The McGuinness-Queen handshake was extremely sophisticated and proper. And given the great personal cruelties that both suffered, I had to stand back from this moment and go, wow.
"2012 saw celebrations across the UK to mark the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, culminating in a star-studded concert.
Everyone in the mouth say yeah!
I just remember thinking, where does this happen? This could only happen here. 250,000 people in the Mall and round the front of Buckingham Palace. It was just the best vibe ever.
Your Majesty, Mummy. 3 resounding cheers for Her Majesty the Queen. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
Just a month later, the eyes of the world were on London as we hosted the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Almost 1 billion people watched the history of the United Kingdom unfold in spectacular style.
Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, it was so funny and so brilliant. I think only Britain gets it.
It was a representation of what we are as a nation. This reminded me that actually this country has produced so many great things.
I declare open the Games of London, celebrating the 30th Olympiad of the modern era.
I remember thinking, oh, please let us win some medals. And then, as each day went on, it was like, oh, we've got another goal, we've got another 2 goals, we've got another 5 goals.
It's a triumph. Representing Great Britain, Nicola Adams.
I just remember thinking to myself, yes, I've done it. Having my hand raised and the gold medal being put around my neck and just feeling so proud. It was the best moment of my life.
It was just pure relief and disbelief that I'd actually, come to my first Olympics in my home country and won.
As I walked out from the call room to the starting block, I got a massive roar and cheer. Normally I like to listen to music and just be in the zone, but I took one earphone out so I could just mop it all up and just try and capture it.
Great goal for Alison!
It was crazy and amazing how the British public propelled us into legends and heroes.
United States, but here he comes and hits the front. It's going to be a goal for Great Britain.
When I watched the London Paralympics, in all honesty, it's the first time that I was proud to be disabled, because I was in that club. They made disability so cool.
The Olympics and Paralympics weren't just broadcast on TV, they were streamed over the internet and shared on social media around the world.
What differs our age and this century from everything else that went before was the World Wide Web. And that has revolutionised, in every single sense, the planet. We are constantly touching antlers together all the time. This thing in our pocket is constantly alerting us to stuff that's going on.
People spend more of their time interacting with their computers and their tablets than they do with other human beings.
We are all so nosy. And I just think we know so much more about each other.
Social media allows us to connect and share at the touch of a button.
The Queen has passed a technological milestone by sending her first tweet, signing it Elizabeth R.
Everything has moved exponentially, and I think the royal family was certainly on that journey alongside technology that the rest of us were, and I think it made them, by implication, more accessible and more open.
When the Queen photobombed the two girls doing the selfie over the shoulder, and she just kind of popped and went, it shows that she's in tune. She obviously knows what a selfie is. She obviously knows what a photobomb is.
She took to modern technology and secretly rather enjoyed it, I think. And I'm quite sure her grandchildren help her with it because they know how to do everything so quickly.
But through all the advances and innovations of the Queen's long reign, one change has been constant.
Climate change is a huge issue. Science was slowly building up a dossier of evidence. It seems to me that on the scientific evidence to be beyond any question.
The environment begins as a concern in the 60s. We were never entirely unconscious of it. There was always a voice crying in the wilderness, but the voices have become louder.
Those voices have also become younger and more urgent.
It's really important that we make a difference now before it's too late, because if we wait too long, it's going to become an irreversible change that our generation won't be able to stop.
I think my generation suddenly felt, well, maybe we've been asleep for a couple of decades, because with Greta and Extinction Rebellion taking a very urgent interest in their future, it suddenly became at the top of the agenda in a way it had not been.
When the whole green culture hit, first thing was recycling. Everyone had to do their recycling. I was told very clearly by my little girl, no, you must do it. I think if you're a parent, you worry about the future. You want to be green for your kids.
It's a concern the Queen and her family have highlighted for decades, as she reflected in her message to the recent UN climate conference in Glasgow.
The impact of the environment on human progress was a subject close to the heart of my dear late husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. I have drawn great comfort and inspiration from the relentless enthusiasm of people of all ages, especially the young, in calling for everyone to play their part.
When the Queen decides that she thinks something is important enough to support, everybody pays attention. The Queen does not make speeches unless it's a really important national moment.
And in the spring of 2020, we needed to hear from the Queen more than ever. We were living through one of the biggest challenges of her reign.
When COVID started, I was sent home from Madrid. I was doing the commentating on the Olympic qualifiers for the boxing, and that's when I realised that this was going to be quite big. It just shocked me, really, that a virus could bring the whole world to its knees and bring everything to a standstill.
The Queen addressed the nation.
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time. A time of disruption in the life of our country, a disruption that has brought grief to some, financial difficulties to many, and enormous changes to the daily lives of us all.
For me, the Queen is always a comforting presence in a world of fear and uncertainty.
We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
The part where she said that we'll meet again, it just gave you hope that this was all going to end at some point and we could go back to normal.
As we emerge from the pandemic and look ahead to the Platinum Jubilee, the Queen remains dedicated and dutiful, just as she has been through 7 decades of extraordinary change.
It's a long, long, long time. And life changes. Things change.
What has happened over the Queen's reign? Amazing how attitudes have changed.
The social fabric of life in this country has evolved.
Queen Elizabeth II is an inspirational woman.
She's been constant over the 70 years.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister of Canada, for making me feel so old.
The Queen centres us. She has been there throughout all of our lifetimes. And the forever changing world.
All the political turmoil goes around her, and she seems to be in the calm of it all.
Mr. President, I raise my glass to Anglo-American friendship.
She really is serving this country. And it's quite an emotional thing, you know.
There's a feeling of pride about her. She's quite unique.
The Queen represents something very special, something that we value and appreciate and respect. And she's managed to do that while the world around her, in 70 years, has changed out of all recognition.
My Platinum Jubilee year will be an opportunity for people everywhere to give thanks for the enormous changes of the last 70 years, and also to look ahead with confidence.